Shabbat Shalom. What is the true meaning of Revelation? This week's Torah portion is the third in a series of three that stand at the center of our narrative as a Jewish nation. 2 weeks ago in Parashat Bo, we read of the Exodus from Egypt. A week ago with Bashalach, we were standing on the shores of the Red Sea, and this morning in Yitro, we stood together in a reenactment of the scene at Mount Sinai. And the themes of these 3 weeks have a huge and almost incredible grandeur. In Bo, we reconsider the opportunity of what it means to have been enslaved and to become free. A story whose arc still resonates through the ages and whose power we see today, for example, in the recent events of the last year around the Middle East. In Bashalach, we consider what it means to be in the first stages of escape and self-determination and enterprise. And this week we read the narrative of Revelation, and as you Americans would say, that's awesome. But there's a catch. I think it is very easy to misread these parts of the Torah. We've read them before. We know them as stories. We know them by heart. And despite their being spectacular, which without doubt they are, they fail to engage our modern sensibilities or our sense of wonder at any kind of deep or meaningful level. And I want to suggest that that is because of the way that we read them. Many centuries ago, Rambam, our teacher, also known as Maimonides, back in the 12th century, a philosopher, a medical doctor, a Torah commentator, identified that there are 3 approaches to our traditional texts. And in the original context, he's talking about something called Midrash, which is another subject for discussion another time. These days, I suggest that his method and his analysis works just as well for the way that we read Torah, and his message is a message that it would do us well to listen to. He tells us that there are 3 ways of reading and that 2 of them are wrong. Rambam is not somebody who minces words. The third, he says, is difficult, and it requires some investment of time and effort and intelligent, but it is correct. The first wrong way would be to read the Torah literally. And despite all of the supernatural elements of the Exodus from Egypt, the splitting of the sea, and the delivering of Torah at Mount Sinai, I wonder if within each of us is a part that does exactly that on some level is taking it literally. That buried inside us still is the wide-eyed child sitting at the Passover Seder, listening to tales of plagues and fire and clouds and thunder. Does part of us deep down believe, or is it tangled around the part of us that believes that those events actually really happened? And is the effect of our growing older and purportedly wiser to say, well, surely that's not the case? If we take the Torah literally, then the only thing that is going to happen as we grow up is that it will not be true for us anymore. The other wrong way of reading the Torah, says Rambam, is to say that all of it is a fairy tale. And by the way, that is a lot easier to do with the first part of the Torah than it is with the second, but many of us still at some level manage to do it. It's stories. In a fairy tale, nothing is really true, and so the hosts of Israel marching out of Egypt take their place somewhere in our minds with Cinderella's slipper and the beast that wants to be a human being, really, and we shake our heads ruefully at our lost innocence, and we wonder how other people can believe any of this stuff. And Rambam warns us, that's a trap, that's a mistake, and to read Torah in that way is foolish. And he's quite trenchant about it, actually. I went back and looked at what he actually has to say. Are you ready for this? It's going to hurt. He calls it primitive and unconsidered. Ow. So what is the third way? Rambam tells us that there is a very select class of people who are capable of accepting the existence of both surface meaning and depth meaning when they approach a text. They have a very sophisticated understanding of what it means to say that something is true. These are people who can follow a narrative, but who can also tease out parables and riddles and metaphor and symbolism and patterning, and who look at contradiction as a challenge to be interpreted rather than evidence that something is a mistake. These are people who can navigate between the subtle layers of Torah, who can play with the contradictions, who can listen for its echoes, who follow the threads of Torah as if they were the clues to a labyrinth, which, in some sense, is just exactly what they are. And I believe that it is urgent for all of us, as members of the Jewish people, to graduate ourselves without delay to that third class. I believe that we must adopt that third reading of Torah. For one thing, it opens up Torah to us in a way that is meaningful and beneficial. If we begin with the assumption that what's in that red book is a complex text, deliberately complex, not history, not fairy tale, but, as we say in the blessing that we make over it, a Torah emet, a Torah of truth, then we can put ourselves in a place where we can accept that it is trying to teach us something which is true, not history, true. If we read it as history, if we make that mistake, then ultimately it takes us to a place of nullification. None of the events it describes can actually have happened, we tell ourselves, which means it can't be right, which means that there is no reason for us to be in relationship. Wrong approach number one. Alternatively, to read it on its surface takes us to a place where it can't be proved that the events did happen. Can we really prove that Abraham existed? Can we really prove that the Torah was given on Mount Sinai? Can we really prove that there is such a thing as God? When we get tied up in trying to prove it, the only answer is that we can't. And there we are. Torah is absolutely wrong. Therefore, there is no reason to be in relationship with it. Wrong approach number two. But if we read Torah as truth, magnificent and complex and multi-layered, then we are free from those false dichotomies. If the Torah isn't history, we don't have to worry about chronology. We can live peacefully with the fact that Torah is chronologically extremely inconsistent. The first 5 books are all different lengths. They occur over variable time periods. So the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, takes thousands of years, and the book of Vayikra mostly takes place on a single day. And there are 39 years at the beginning of the book of Numbers about which we know precisely nothing. Nothing at all. The Torah doesn't tell us anything about a 39-year period of our history. If we want to read it as history, that's a problem. If we read it as truth, it's not. We can be fascinated and rather than annoyed. Similarly, we can be fascinated and questioning rather than roll our eyes when the Torah repeats itself, which it does quite a lot. And perhaps most importantly, to adopt and internalize this complex reading of Torah means that we can find ourselves inside it. And in doing so, perhaps, we can begin to track back to the question with which I began. What does it truly mean to experience revelation? And it turns out that this week's Torah portion is really one of the best Torah portions of all to practice this skill of complex reading. And in order to show that, the only way to show that is to read again a piece of this morning's portion as if it were complex. Are you ready to have a go at doing that? Okay, if you want to follow, if you want the words in front of you, you don't need them, I will tell you what they are, but it's the top of page 449 in the Red Book, page 449. And those of you who want to look, please feel free to find it, 449. Those of you who are okay with listening, let me contextualize it. It takes place immediately after the giving of what we call the 10 Commandments. That, by the way, is another mistake. They're not the 10 Commandments. They are the first 10 of all of the commandments that are going to follow, all of the commandments that are going to set out a system of relationship between the Israelite nation on the one hand and something much bigger and more mysterious than the Israelite nation on the other. And here is how the Torah tells it. She says, all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey. But let God not speak to us, lest we die. Moses answered the people, be not afraid, for God has come only in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may be ever with you, so that you do not go astray. So the people remained at a distance, while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. As so many parts of Torah do, this little portrait is a paradigm. It is a paradigm for how our ancestors initially responded to the experience of revelation, and what the paradigm has to teach is how we also might be responding. For those of you who are visual and in the business in this audience, this is the reaction shot to the 10 Commandments. What is the truth that the reaction shot teaches us? I want to make 3 suggestions. The first is that it teaches us that the experience is not an individual experience. The experience is communal. We can contrast forever what Alana read us so beautifully this morning, Isaiah's personal experience of revelation. That's not Sinai. At Sinai, there are 600,000 people, the Torah tells us, not only members of the Israelite nation, but also assorted other hangers-on. And these are the beginning, the germ of what will be the treasured nation. The nation is not a nation. The single is split. Already, more than one people is involved. Torah, on its face, is already contradicting itself. Next thing to notice is the presence of the supernatural. And for this, we need to let our eyes drift across the page from the English to the Hebrew, because we tend to read Torah in translation, and translation is always a choice. The Torah tells us all the people saw the thunder. I'm going to say it again. All the people saw the thunder. What is wrong with that sentence? Right. You can't see thunder. Thunder is something that you hear, but the Torah is very clear. All the people saw the thunder. They heard the lightning. If we read that literally, it's wrong, because it doesn't jive with our sensual experience. If we read it as teaching us something that is true, then what we recognize is that it is time that we adjusted our vocabulary of what the whole Sinai experience is about. Whatever is being described, it cannot have been revelation, because revelation implies that it's something that we see. And Sinai was not like that. Sinai was a full body, full brain, upside down experience. An experience that inhabits the boundary between dream and reality, when 6 impossible things can happen before breakfast. That was what Sinai was like. We experienced complete discombobulation of all of our senses, and yet we go on living in that contradiction. Now, for the third idea, we need to make the leap that a text says what it says, but there are multiple ways of understanding it. And out of that complex text, I'm going to draw just one thread, and that is the thread of the symbolic. Those of you who enjoy dream interpretation will perhaps have come across the idea that when we dream of a character, the character is an aspect of ourselves. Every character who we meet in our dreams is in fact a reflection of us. Suppose that this text exists in that reality. If that is the case, both the people and Moses are aspects of ourself experiencing what we like to call revelation. Let me suggest what another truth of this text then becomes. When we experience Sinai, part of us is completely overwhelmed and we retreat. We step back, we create distance. We can't experience it ourselves. It's too big, it's too real, it's too scary, it's too overwhelming. And so we nominate another part of ourselves as a Moses, as an intermediary. And we say to that part of ourselves, you do it. I can't, all of me, take all of this in. And that part of ourselves, our Moses, steps up to the task. It tries to reassure us. But notice what happens. In order to reassure us, it has to diminish the experience. It recasts that enormous experience into a moral test. God is only coming to test you and to check that you really understand what the fear of God means. That's not what happened. That's what our internal intermediary is telling us what happened, because we are not yet sufficiently grown to experience what actually did. To turn Sinai into a moral test makes a lot more sense than audible lightning, just as long as we remember that that is not what happened. I think that today, over and over again, we fall into that trap of stepping backwards and giving in to being overwhelmed. I think that we need to reassess whether we delegate our experience of Torah, that sacred relationship, to intermediaries. And if we do, I want to suggest that we need to accept that we're going to lose out on part of the experience because we will be getting second-hand Torah. And I wonder if that's good enough. I consider, you see, that the reclaiming of our authentic relationship with complicated Torah, real Torah, not history, not fairy tales, actual Torah, subtle and complex and contradictory and often overwhelming, is the most important task of this Jewish generation. If we delegate our sacred entitlement to this most complex of relationships, then I think we are showing ourselves unworthy of our heritage, because we are not a tradition of intermediaries. We often boast about that. We don't have intermediaries. Our mystics tell us that all of our souls, everybody sitting here, everybody sitting in every synagogue this morning who has listened to that narrative, every Jew and Jew by choice in the world, all over the world, stood at Sinai with every other Jew. And that somewhere engraved on our communal DNA is that audible lightning and that visible thunder, and that deep inside all of us, we remember what it was like to be there. But we can only build on that experience if we take that third way. We need to give the Torah the benefit of the doubt. We need to acknowledge that it has intelligence. Because 2,000 years ago, with Jerusalem in smoking ruins behind them, a group of rabbis committed us to a tradition that interprets Torah, with Torah, this multifaceted text, at our center. And the exploration of Torah and everything that comes from the exploration of Torah has been holding our people together for all of this time. And for us to dismiss it as badly written history or just stories is not only to miss out on what it has to offer, it is to abdicate our responsibility for the task that the rabbis created for us. There is no such thing as revelation. There isn't even a word for revelation in Hebrew. Well, there is a word. The word is gilui, and it means the uncovering of something. But that's not the word we use. That's not the word our tradition uses to describe Sinai. We call it Matan Torah. We call it the giving of Torah. And the rabbis of our tradition, who knew all about reading Torah as complex and contradictory, also teach us that Torah is constantly being given over and over again, in every generation, in every moment, in every Jewish soul. We are constantly experiencing the giving of Torah. And we can get there by learning again how to read it. Because the only question really, if Torah is constantly being given, is, are we ready to receive it? And I suggest that it is time that we make ourselves ready. Shabbat Shalom.